Captain Mark Anders adjusted his uniform, the stiff collar pressing uncomfortably against his neck. As the sleek human diplomatic vessel Ascent eased into orbit above Loma Prime, the central hub of the Galactic Council, he couldn't help but feel the weight of the mission pressing on his shoulders. Earth had never been granted an audience here before. They weren't even supposed to be present. It was sheer audacity that brought them to this moment, the human delegation's insistence that they be heard, that Earth no longer be dismissed as a backwater. "Orbit established, Captain," announced Lieutenant Jenna Hellstrom, her voice steady over the comms. Anders tapped the console in front of him and brought up the display of the Council's sprawling space station, its interlocking rings glinting in the light of Loma's twin suns. Around him, the command deck hummed with activity. Officers reviewed data streams, adjusted orbital parameters, and prepared the transport shuttle for the upcoming meeting. "You ready for this, Mark?" Commander Darius Calloway asked, stepping up beside him. Darius, a longtime friend and one of the best tactical minds in the fleet, had been handpicked to serve as Anders' second-in-command for this mission. His calm demeanor was an anchor in the otherwise turbulent seas of interstellar diplomacy. "Ready as I'll ever be," Anders replied, offering a tight smile. "You've read the same reports I have. The Council thinks we're some novelty act, plucky little humans playing in a galaxy we don't understand. I intend to prove them wrong." Darius chuckled, his deep voice resonating in the confined space of the deck. "They've got no idea what they're in for. So long as you don't give one of your famous speeches and put them all to sleep." "Don't tempt me," Anders shot back, his grin widening. "I might just do that if things go south." The two men shared a brief moment of levity before returning to the task at hand. Darius checked his datapad. "We're cleared for transport. Shuttle is standing by." Anders nodded. "Jenna, you've got the bridge. Keep us in a stable orbit and monitor comms. If anything looks off, I want to know about it immediately." "Aye, Captain," Jenna replied, her fingers already moving across her console. The trip down to the Council's central hall was uneventful, but Anders' nerves were still on edge. The human delegation had brought only a skeleton crew, just enough to show they were serious, not so many as to appear overbearing. The Council chamber was a vast, echoing space filled with representatives from dozens of civilizations. Some were humanoid, others were truly alien in form, massive, scaled creatures, beings of shifting light, and species whose very presence seemed to ripple the air around them. As Anders and his team stepped into the chamber, a hush fell over the crowd. He felt dozens of eyes, some biological, some mechanical, fixing on him. He straightened his shoulders, keeping his expression neutral, professional. One of the Council members, a towering insectoid alien named Counselor Vrex, clicked her mandibles in what Anders had come to recognize as a sign of amusement. "So, the humans have decided to join us uninvited. A bold move. We did not request your presence." "No, you didn't," Anders said, his voice firm. "But we are here all the same. Humanity deserves a place at this table. We may not be as old or as large as some of the empires represented here, but we have something to offer: knowledge, perspective, and the willingness to work alongside others for the good of all." A low murmur ran through the chamber. Counselor Vrex tilted her head, her multifaceted eyes glittering. "And what precisely do you believe humanity has to contribute that we do not already possess?" Before Anders could respond, Darius stepped forward. "For one thing, fresh ideas. We're not bound by centuries of tradition or stifled by stagnant bureaucracy. We adapt quickly and we find solutions where others might only see problems. Humanity is young, yes, but that makes us more willing to take risks and push boundaries." A different Council member, a serpentine alien with a voice that seemed to hiss and hum simultaneously, spoke next. "And you would have us believe that your species' youth and inexperience are strengths rather than weaknesses?" Mark glanced at Darius, who gave a slight nod, encouraging him to keep going. "We're not asking for your trust overnight," Anders said. "But give us a chance. Work with us and you'll see that our contributions go beyond what you might expect." Another murmur spread through the room. Some Council members looked intrigued, others skeptical. Counselor Vrex tapped her claws against the table, the clicking sound sharp and deliberate. "You claim to bring new perspectives, but understand this, human. In this chamber, words mean little without actions. If humanity wishes to be recognized, you must prove yourselves through deeds, not rhetoric." Mark met her gaze steadily. "Understood. That's why we're here, to start building that trust, one step at a time." The session continued, marked by more pointed questions and careful diplomacy. Darius chimed in frequently, his calm, measured responses balancing Anders' more direct approach. By the end of the day, the human delegation hadn't achieved a full seat on the Council, but they had earned something just as valuable: the opportunity to return. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Back aboard the Ascent, Anders stood by the observation window watching the council's massive station shrink into the distance. Darius joined him, sipping from a steaming mug of tea. Not bad for a first day, huh? Anders exhaled a long breath. We've got a lot of work ahead of us, Darius. This was just the beginning. Darius smirked. Then we'd better get some rest. Who knows what they'll throw at us tomorrow? Mark nodded, a small smile tugging at his lips. For the first time in a long while, he felt a cautious sense of hope. Chapter 2, The Unlikely Alliance. Captain Mark Anders sipped his coffee in the galley of the Ascent. The brew was bitter, almost acrid, but it kept him grounded. Across the table, Commander Darius Calloway flipped through data on a handheld pad, frowning as he read. So, Darius, Anders said, breaking the silence. How long until the council stops looking at us like the new kid on the playground? Darius didn't look up. Could be a while. They've been doing this for centuries, Mark. We're the latecomers, remember? Yeah, but latecomers with a knack for improvisation. Anders leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. We've got something they don't, something they can't quite figure out yet. And what's that? Darius asked, finally glancing at Anders. Creativity. Drive. Anders took another sip of his coffee. Maybe even a little reckless charm. Darius snorted. Reckless charm isn't going to win us any allies. What we need is credibility. Actions speak louder then. I know. Actions, not words, Anders interrupted, waving a hand. But that's the thing. Every action we take, every mission, they'll be watching. We can't afford to screw up. The ship's intercom buzzed and Jenna Hallstrom's voice came through. Captain, incoming communication from Zenithar Command. Looks like an invitation. Anders raised an eyebrow. Invitation? That's new. Put it through. The galley's central screen flickered, displaying the image of a violet-skinned Zenithar official. Her flowing silver robes shimmered under soft, artificial lighting. She inclined her head slightly, her long, pointed ears twitching in a gesture that Anders had learned was a sign of acknowledgement. Captain Anders, Commander Calloway, she began, her voice melodic but measured. I am Administrator Kalani of the Zenithar Diplomatic Corps. On behalf of my people, I extend an invitation for a joint exploration initiative. It would be an opportunity for our species to work together, learn from one another, and perhaps begin to build the understanding that has thus far eluded us. Anders exchanged a glance with Darius. Joint exploration, you say? Yes, Kalani continued. Your vessel has shown remarkable adaptability in navigating the complex regions of galactic space. The Zenithar believe that a collaborative mission could benefit both of our peoples. However, this invitation is contingent on your willingness to cooperate fully and to accept Zenithar oversight during the mission. Sounds reasonable enough, Darius said quietly. Anders leaned forward. Administrator Kalani, we're willing to consider your proposal. Where would this mission take us? Kalani's expression shifted slightly, curiosity mixed with something unreadable. The uncharted Perseid sector. It is a region known for its instability but also its rich resources and potential technological discoveries. We believe your unique approach to problem-solving would complement our established protocols. Anders glanced at Darius again, who nodded. All right, Anders said. We'll discuss the details with our crew, but you can count on our cooperation. Excellent, Kalani replied. I will forward the full briefing shortly. We look forward to working together, Captain. The screen went dark. Darius leaned back, folding his arms. Well, that's something I didn't expect. Joint exploration with the Zenithar. Anders smirked. Looks like our reckless charm is paying off. Darius shook his head. Or maybe they just want to keep us where they can see us. Either way, Anders said, we've got a chance to show them what we're made of. As they left the galley, Anders couldn't help but feel a flicker of excitement. For the first time since arriving at Loma Prime, humanity had been offered a seat, not at the council's main table, but at least at the edges of the circle. It was a small step, but it was progress. Anders turned to Darius as they walked down the corridor toward the bridge. I get the feeling this is just the beginning, my friend. Darius glanced at him. If it means proving we belong here, then I'm all in. Good, Anders said with a grin. Because if there's one thing we humans are good at, it's making the most of our opportunities. Chapter 3, Into the Unknown. The hangar of the Zenithar exploration vessel was a marvel of engineering, and it still made Captain Mark Anders feel small every time he set foot in it. Towering support structures and glistening, organic-like walls hummed faintly with the energy that powered the ship. Even the air here felt different, crisper, with a faint metallic tang. Standing in the center of it all, Mark crossed his arms as he waited for the mission briefing to begin. Beside him, Commander Darius Calloway shifted his weight from one foot to the other. Any idea where we're headed? Darius asked, his voice low so it wouldn't carry over the quiet buzz of the hangar crew preparing for launch. Mark shook his head. Not a clue. They're playing this close to the vest. I've asked 3 times and all I've gotten is that it's uncharted. Uncharted, Darius repeated, his brow furrowing. That could mean anything from unexplored star systems to outright hostile territory. Exactly, Mark said, glancing around as more Xenothar crew entered the hangar. But we're not going to learn anything standing here. We'll hear it straight from Kalani soon enough. At that moment, Kalani stepped into the hangar, her silver and violet uniform catching the light. She moved gracefully, her violet skin glowing faintly under the ship's artificial light. When she reached them, she clasped her hands in front of her, her long fingers interlocking in a gesture that Mark had come to recognize as both polite and commanding. Captain Anders, Commander Calloway, she began, her tone both formal and warm. I trust you've found your quarters satisfactory? They're better than anything we've got back on the Ascent, Mark replied with a small smile. You Xenothar sure know how to make a human feel at home. Kalani's lips twitched into a brief smile before she continued. I'm glad to hear that. Now let's discuss the mission. We'll be venturing into the Perseid sector, specifically an uncharted cluster beyond the primary galactic trade routes. Our long-range scans have detected an anomalous energy signature there, something we believe may be a natural phenomenon, though its pattern suggests it could also be artificial in origin. Mark exchanged a look with Darius. Artificial? He asked, raising an eyebrow. Any idea who or what might have left it? That's what we're here to determine, Kalani replied. The Xenothar have mapped much of this region, but this cluster remains largely unexplored. If it is a natural phenomenon, it could provide valuable insight into stellar formation and energy distribution. If it is artificial, we must determine whether it poses a threat or an opportunity. And if it's hostile? Darius asked, his tone cautious. Kalani's expression didn't change. Then we will assess and respond accordingly. However, that is why we value your participation in this mission, Commander Calloway. Your tactical expertise will be invaluable if we encounter unexpected challenges. Mark nodded. All right. So, when do we leave? As soon as the final checks are complete, Kalani said. The ship is prepared and our course is set. I suggest you both take this time to review the available data on the Perseid sector. We'll convene in the command center once we arrive. With that, Kalani gave them a polite nod and left the hangar, her movements as smooth and deliberate as ever. Darius let out a low whistle. Well, she's not wasting any time, is she? Would you, if you had an entire council breathing down your neck? Mark replied, half joking. Darius shrugged. Point taken. Let's grab that data and see what we're up against. The 2 men spent the next several hours reviewing the sparse information the Xenothar had provided. Star charts of the Perseid sector revealed an unusual density of asteroids and gas clouds, making navigation tricky. The energy signature they were chasing wasn't consistent, flickering in and out like a dying beacon. This is going to be one hell of a ride, Mark said, leaning back in his chair and rubbing his temples. Darius grinned. You've always liked a challenge, Mark. Consider this another chance to prove the council wrong. Mark chuckled. Let's just hope we don't end up as a cautionary tale instead. When the ship finally entered the Perseid sector, the view outside the viewport was both breathtaking and ominous. Massive nebulae stretched like cosmic brush strokes across the void, their colors shifting from deep purple to fiery orange. Asteroid fields drifted lazily, their surfaces glittering with mineral deposits. Damn, Darius muttered, leaning forward. This place is something else. It's something, all right, Mark agreed, his eyes fixed on the swirling clouds of gas. Let's just hope it's something we can handle. The ship's comm system crackled and Kalani's voice came through. Captain Anders, Commander Calloway, please report to the command center. We've located the energy source. Mark and Darius exchanged a quick glance before heading down the corridor. As they approached the command center, the hum of the ship grew louder, as if the entire vessel were aware of the mystery they were about to uncover. What do you think it is? Darius asked quietly. I don't know, Mark said, stepping through the sliding doors. But I guess we're about to find out. Chapter 4, A Moment of Trust. The command center was a hive of activity with Xenothar officers and human crew working shoulder to shoulder at glowing control panels. Mark Anders and Darius Calloway entered, both immediately noticing the energy in the room. It wasn't panic, but it wasn't exactly calm either, more like a collective sense of urgency. Kalani stood at the center, her violet complexion reflecting the soft light from the main display. A massive star chart projected above the room's central table, showing a pulsing anomaly in the heart of the Perseid sector. What have we got? Mark asked, stepping up beside her. Kalani didn't turn at first. Her long fingers moved gracefully over the control interface, adjusting the projection's focus. The anomaly zoomed in, revealing jagged patterns that resembled nothing Mark had seen before. Finally, she glanced over at him, her expression serious. "It's definitely artificial," she said. "The energy signature is too regular, too deliberate. And it's not just a beacon or a signal, it's a containment field of some kind." Darius frowned. "A containment field? For what?" Kalani's brow furrowed. "We don't know yet. But the energy patterns suggest something is being held in place. The field's intensity is fluctuating, which means it might not hold for much longer." Mark crossed his arms, considering. "If it breaks, what are we looking at? A release of energy? A new threat?" Kalani hesitated, and that pause told Mark everything. She didn't know. It was a rare moment for her, normally so composed and certain, and it made Mark take a closer look at the projection. He tapped a button, highlighting the patterns. "What do these lines here mean?" Kalani looked at him, then at the projection. "They're disruptions. Disturbances within the containment. Something is trying to push through. Whatever's inside is trying to get out," Mark finished. The room grew quieter as the crew listened in. Darius spoke next, his tone measured. "So what's the plan?" "We need one, now." Kalani met his eyes. "We need to approach cautiously. If we destabilize the field by moving in too fast, we could make the situation worse. But we also can't ignore it. We'll run a close scan, gather as much data as possible before making any direct moves." Mark nodded, but there was something in her voice, something she wasn't saying. "Kalani, what aren't you telling us?" She held his gaze for a moment, then exhaled. "There are old Xenothar records that mention this kind of energy pattern. They're incomplete fragments, really, but they suggest that the field could be holding a device. A device left behind by a civilization long before our own." "Like a weapon?" Darius asked. "Possibly," she admitted. "Or a piece of advanced technology. Something the creators didn't want anyone else to have. If that's the case, it could be dangerous if it falls into the wrong hands." Mark exchanged a glance with Darius. "Or if it's unstable. We'll proceed carefully. What's our first step?" Kalani tapped a sequence into the controls. "We'll send in a remote probe. The Xenothar vessel has advanced scanning capabilities far beyond what Earthships can do. The probe will get close, take detailed readings, and transmit them back. Once we have that data, we can decide on the next course of action." Darius looked at Mark. "And if something goes wrong?" Mark set his jaw. "Then we do what we always do. We adapt." The Xenothar officers worked quickly, preparing the probe. Kalani stayed close to the controls, directing the operation. Mark watched her, noting the way she focused so intently, her calm professionalism masking what he could tell was a deep concern. He stepped closer, lowering his voice so only she could hear. "You're worried about more than just the field failing, aren't you?" Kalani glanced at him, her expression unreadable. "This kind of technology, if it's what I think it is, shouldn't exist anymore. It was locked away for a reason. The fact that it's still active is troubling." Mark placed a hand on the console bess. Darius's voice broke through the moment. "Probe's ready, Captain. Standing by for launch." Mark straightened, returning to the room's steady rhythm. "Launch the probe. Let's see what we're dealing with." As the probe shot forward on the screen, the tension in the command center was palpable. The crew waited, watching as the tiny, glowing craft approached the anomaly. Data began to stream in, raw numbers, energy readouts, molecular breakdowns. The room was silent except for the beeping consoles and quiet murmurs as officers analyzed the incoming information. After what felt like an eternity, Kalani finally spoke. "The containment field is holding for now. But the energy inside is changing." "Changing how?" Mark asked. "It's increasing," she said, her voice tight. "Rapidly." Mark and Darius exchanged a glance. "That doesn't sound good," Darius muttered. "No," Kalani agreed. "It doesn't. We need to decide what to do next, quickly." Chapter 5, The First Kiss. The command center's lights dimmed to a softer glow, casting a warm hue over the room as the team settled in for what would undoubtedly be a long night. Captain Mark Anders stood by the main console, leaning against the edge of the table as he studied the anomaly's most recent data feed. On the far side, Kalani worked in near silence, her long fingers dancing across the interface as she refined the scans. Darius was to Mark's left, tapping on his datapad and occasionally muttering under his breath. "I don't like the look of these energy spikes," Darius said, finally breaking the silence. "It's like whatever's inside the containment field is waking up." Kalani glanced over at him, her normally composed expression tight with concentration. "Waking up implies it was ever dormant. I believe it's been active all along. The field is merely failing to contain it fully now." Mark tilted his head, considering her words. And once it breaks free, what are we dealing with? Some kind of weapon, or just raw, uncontrolled energy? Unclear, she replied, her voice calm but firm. The patterns don't match any known weapon signature, but the energy is not benign. We can't treat it as harmless. Mark sighed and rubbed the back of his neck. Great. So we're playing interstellar roulette here. We have options, Kalani countered. If we adjust the ship's stabilizers and maintain a steady distance, we can continue scanning without triggering a collapse. That sounds like a short-term fix, Darius said. Short-term is all we have right now, she replied, her tone edged with urgency. If you have a better idea, Commander, I'm open to hearing it. Mark held up a hand before Darius could retort. All right, let's focus. Kalani, can we get more detailed readings from the probe without moving in closer? She nodded. I believe so. I'll increase the probe's sensor output, but it will take time. Time is something we might not have much of, Mark said. He turned to Darius. In the meantime, keep an eye on those energy spikes. If they cross a certain threshold, I want to know about it immediately. Got it, Darius replied. As the minutes turned into hours, the command center settled into a tense rhythm. Kalani worked quietly but efficiently, occasionally glancing toward Mark as if gauging his mood. Mark, in turn, stole glances at her, trying to read what lay beneath her professional exterior. When the latest batch of data arrived, Kalani called Mark over. Take a look at this, she said, her voice lower now. She pointed at the screen, showing a series of complex waveforms. Do you see how these peaks are aligning with the containment field's fluctuations? It's almost as if the field is feeding off the energy inside rather than suppressing it. Mark frowned. So it's a self-sustaining system? Possibly, she said, but not one designed to last indefinitely. It's unstable, and that instability is increasing. Darius, Mark called out. How's our proximity to the field? Any sign of radiation leakage? No leakage, Darius replied from his station. We're still in the clear, but I don't like how close we're getting to the red line. Mark turned back to Kalani. How long can we safely maintain this position? Hours maybe, she said, but I'd recommend we make a decision long before then. Mark nodded. Agreed. Let's gather as much data as we can in the next 30 minutes. Then we'll reassess. Kalani gave him a small nod of acknowledgement, her eyes lingering on him a moment longer than necessary. Mark noticed the faint flicker of uncertainty in her gaze, and he found himself stepping just a little closer. Kalani, he said softly, keeping his voice low enough that Darius couldn't overhear. You've been on more of these exploratory missions than I have. What's your instinct telling you right now? She looked up at him, her expression guarded. My instinct tells me this is not something we should leave unchecked. Whatever it is, it's powerful, and it doesn't belong to the Xenothar, the humans, or any of the known council races. It's older. Mark studied her face, seeing a flicker of something he couldn't quite identify. Was it fear? Concern? Or something else entirely? Without thinking, he reached out, his hand brushing her arm lightly. Her gaze dropped to his hand, then back up to meet his eyes. For a brief moment, the tension in the room seemed to melt away, leaving just the two of them in the softly glowing light. Kalani took a small step closer, and Mark felt his breath catch. I trust your judgment, he said quietly. You've been straightforward with me since the beginning, and I'll back whatever call you think we need to make. Kalani's lips curved into a faint smile, and for the first time, her usual composure softened. That means more than you know, Captain. Mark's hand lingered on her arm for a moment longer, then dropped back to his side. Kalani hesitated, her violet eyes searching his face, before turning back to the console. We'll continue the scans, she said, her voice steady again. And we'll make the call together. Mark nodded, stepping back slightly. Together it is. Chapter 6, Revelations. The command center remained alive with the hum of the ship's systems, but the atmosphere had grown heavier with every new data packet. Mark Anders stood beside Commander Darius Calloway as the two reviewed the incoming scans. Their faces were tense, eyes glued to the holographic display projecting the anomaly's energy patterns. Those readings are getting worse, Darius muttered, his fingers moving across his tablet. The spikes are more frequent and stronger than before. Whatever's inside the containment field is not just waking up, it's struggling to break free. Mark frowned. Struggling is the right word. If it was just a machine, the energy wouldn't fluctuate like this. This feels alive. You think it's sentient? Darius asked, skeptical. Not necessarily sentient, Mark replied, but more than a lifeless hunk of metal. The patterns feel deliberate, almost purposeful. Kalani approached, her smooth, even gait betraying none of the urgency Mark saw in her eyes. We're approaching the point where further scans won't give us any more clarity, she said, gesturing to the display. If we want answers, we need to take a closer look. Darius tilted his head. A closer look? You mean sending people in? Kalani nodded. Yes. A small team, myself included, can enter the outer perimeter of the containment field. We'll deploy advanced sensors, retrieve physical samples, and attempt to determine what's truly inside. Mark crossed his arms. And what happens if the field collapses while you're in there? We have no idea how dangerous that thing could be once it's out. That's a risk we must weigh against the unknown, Kalani said firmly. The longer we wait, the more unstable the field becomes. We need answers, and remote probes won't cut it. Mark exchanged a glance with Darius. All right, he said slowly. I'll lead the team. Kalani raised an eyebrow. Captain, with all due respect, my expertise is invaluable, Mark finished. And I need you guiding us from the command center. If something goes wrong, I want the best mind we have analyzing it. I'll go in with Darius and 2 of your Zenithar technicians. We'll retrieve the data and we'll get out. Kalani hesitated, then inclined her head. Very well. But I expect you to keep the comm line open at all times. I'll monitor your every move and provide guidance if things deteriorate. Deal, Mark said. An hour later, the shuttle was prepped and ready. Mark stood in the hangar bay with Darius and the 2 Zenithar technicians, their silvery armor gleaming under the bright lights. The technicians carried advanced sensor arrays and containment equipment, their movements precise and efficient. As they boarded the shuttle, Darius leaned in. You sure about this, Mark? This isn't exactly in the manual. Mark smirked. Nothing we've done so far has been in the manual. But yeah, I'm sure. We'll handle this. The shuttle launched smoothly, the interior vibrating gently as it approached the anomaly's edge. The faint glow of the containment field grew brighter, and the readings on their consoles spiked in intensity. The field was not a simple bubble, it was a shifting, pulsating veil of light that seemed alive in its own right. Hold steady, Mark said over the comms. Kalani, do you copy? Loud and clear came her voice. Your approach vector is stable. I'm transferring updated field readings now. Darius read the incoming data on his pad. Looks like the field is thinning near the northern quadrant. We should head there, less interference. Mark nodded. All right. Adjust course to the northern quadrant. We'll start the scans there. The shuttle hovered near the field's perimeter and the Zenithar technicians deployed their equipment. One of them, a tall male with an intricate pattern of bioluminescent markings on his arms, set up a sensor array and began taking readings. Energy density here is lower, the technician said. We'll have a clearer view in just a moment. Darius moved to the viewport, staring out at the swirling light. This whole thing feels off. It's like the field is trying to draw us in. Maybe it is, Mark said quietly. Or maybe it's trying to keep something from getting out. The first technician turned to Mark. Captain, the energy pattern inside, it's changing again. It's almost rhythmic. Mark stepped closer. Rhythmic how? Like a signal. More like a pulse, the technician said. Like it's communicating. Mark's stomach tightened. Communicating with what? The technician's expression turned grim. We don't know yet. But it's not random. Something in there is alive. Darius, Mark said, turning to his second-in-command. Get ready to pull us out if anything shifts. I don't like the sound of this. On it, Darius said, already at the console. As the readings continued to pour in, Mark felt the weight of the situation settle on his shoulders. This was no ordinary mission. This was something ancient, powerful, and utterly beyond human understanding. But they were here, and they would see it through together. Chapter 7, A Test of Loyalty. The ship's operations center buzzed with low voices and the steady hum of machinery. On the main screen, the swirling anomaly loomed larger than ever. Every passing moment made it seem more alive, more unpredictable. Captain Mark Anders leaned over the console, his hand pressed flat against the surface as he scanned the latest data readout. This doesn't look good, he muttered. The containment field's integrity is down to 30%. Commander Darius Calloway stood next to him, holding a datapad. It's holding for now, but it's not going to last much longer. If we don't act soon. Kalani entered the room, her presence commanding even in the tense atmosphere. Then we must make a decision, she said, stepping up to the console. Prolonging the situation only increases the risks. If the containment collapses entirely, we'll lose any control we still have. Mark straightened, meeting her steady gaze. We're already running full diagnostics. Every possible scenario ends the same way, the field fails and whatever's inside is released. We need more time. We don't have more time, Captain Anders, Kalani said firmly. The energy spikes are becoming more erratic. I've seen these patterns before. If they reach a certain threshold, the release could be violent. Catastrophic. Darius glanced at Mark, his voice low. You trust her judgment on this? Mark nodded slowly. I do. But that doesn't mean we're out of options. Kalani, is there any chance we can stabilize the field even temporarily? Kalani hesitated, her long fingers brushing the edge of the console. There is one possibility, she said carefully. We could redirect power from the ship's core into the field's outer layer. It might buy us a few more hours, long enough to analyze the anomaly's core structure. Darius frowned. And if that fails? Kalani's expression was serious. If it fails, we'll be completely defenseless. The ship's shields won't protect us from the energy surge. Mark leaned back, considering. And if we do nothing? Then the field will fail on its own, Kalani replied. The difference is that we'd have no control over the timing. A sudden collapse could leave us unprepared. The room fell silent as the weight of her words sank in. Mark glanced at Darius, who gave a small nod, then looked back at Kalani. All right, let's do it. Prepare the core for a power transfer. Kalani turned to the nearest Xenothar technician, issuing orders in her native language. The technician nodded and began working at the console. Darius stayed close, monitoring the ship's power levels. Mark, Darius said quietly, if this doesn't work, it's not just the field that'll collapse. We'll be a sitting duck out here. I know, Mark replied. But I trust Kalani. If she says this is our best shot, then we take it. Darius studied his face for a moment, then nodded. All right, I'm with you. The minutes dragged on as the team worked. Kalani and the Xenothar technicians moved with practiced efficiency while Mark and Darius kept a close watch on the energy levels. The ship's core pulsed steadily, the readings shifting as the power transfer began. Transfer is stable, one of the Xenothar technicians reported. Field strength is increasing. Kalani checked the display, her eyes narrowing. Hold steady. We need to maintain this balance. Mark stood by her side, close enough to see the faint tension in her usually composed features. How long until we know if it's working? A few minutes, she said. But if the readings stay consistent, it means we've bought ourselves some time. The ship shuddered slightly, a low vibration rippling through the deck. Darius looked up from his datapad. Was that normal? Kalani's gaze darted to the console. The field is stabilizing, but the anomaly is reacting to the change. That vibration was feedback from the core. Do we need to pull back? Mark asked. Kalani shook her head. No. It's within acceptable parameters. But we'll need to watch closely. Any sudden changes could still cause the field to collapse. Mark nodded, but his eyes stayed on Kalani. He could see the strain in her posture, the way her shoulders were just a fraction too tense. He placed a hand on her arm, his voice low. You're doing everything you can. She looked at him, her expression softening for a brief moment. So are you, she said quietly. Darius cleared his throat, drawing their attention back to the screens. Field strength is holding. We might just pull this off. Mark stepped back, his hand falling to his side. Good. Let's keep monitoring. We're not out of this yet. Chapter 8, A Future Together. The operations center aboard the Xenothar vessel was silent, save for the low hum of the stabilizers. The containment field around the anomaly had held, its energy levels steadying after the desperate power transfer from the ship's core. Captain Mark Anders and Commander Darius Calloway stood near the main console, watching as the final data streams trickled in. Kalani worked quietly beside them, her violet complexion glowing faintly under the soft overhead lights. Mark folded his arms, his voice calm but tinged with curiosity. So, what's the verdict? Do we have any clearer idea of what we're dealing with? Kalani glanced at him, her expression thoughtful. The energy patterns have stabilized and the scans have given us a detailed structural map of the object inside. It appears to be a type of advanced containment device, an ancient mechanism designed to suppress and control an enormous energy source. Darius frowned, tapping the edge of the console with his fingers. But why suppress it in the first place? What's so dangerous about the energy it's holding? Kalani shook her head. That's the part we still don't understand. The readings don't match any known weapon or reactor design. The energy is incredibly powerful, but it doesn't display the chaotic volatility you'd expect from a weapon. If anything, it feels deliberate. Deliberate, Mark repeated, leaning forward. As in controlled? Directed? Possibly, Kalani said. It's almost as if the energy was meant to be contained indefinitely to serve a purpose that's long been forgotten. Mark and Darius exchanged a glance. That doesn't sound comforting, Darius muttered. What if whoever built this thing left it here for a reason? Maybe they knew it was too dangerous to release. That's one interpretation, Kalani admitted. But it could also be that they intended to return for it. The technology is far beyond anything we've encountered, even for Xenothar standards. If we could study it further. Mark raised a hand. I'm all for studying it, but let's make sure we don't end up releasing something we can't handle. The containment field is stable for now, but we shouldn't push our luck. Kalani nodded, acknowledging his caution. Agreed. The field should hold as long as we maintain the current energy input. We can monitor it remotely and continue our analysis from a safe distance. Darius exhaled slowly, relief evident in his posture. So, we're not blowing ourselves up today. That's a win. Mark allowed himself a small smile. I'll take that win. Kalani turned back to the console, her fingers deftly adjusting the data streams. Captain Commander, you both handled this situation admirably. Few would have managed to stabilize the field under such extreme conditions. Mark tilted his head, studying her. You're giving us a lot of credit, Kalani. If it weren't for your expertise, we wouldn't have made it this far. She met his gaze, her violet eyes holding his for a moment. It was a team effort. None of us could have done this alone. Darius chuckled softly, breaking the tension. So what happens now? Do we just leave this thing here and hope it doesn't decide to wake up again? Kalani's expression turned thoughtful. We'll report our findings to the Zenithar Council and the human delegation. Both sides will have to decide the next course of action. For now, our primary goal is ensuring the containment field remains stable. Beyond that, we'll need time to fully understand what we've found. Mark nodded, his mind already turning over the possibilities. Well, if there's one thing we humans are good at, it's figuring out the impossible. Kalani's lips curved into a F. Mark laughed, the tension finally easing. You read my mind, Commander. Let's get out of here. As they left the operations center, Mark cast one last glance at the anomaly on the screen. The swirling energy within the containment field was calm for now, a distant storm that they had managed to contain. For now.